as we talked recently, of course, and we look back and we were like, we were just young. It really wasn't anything that was so horrible going on in the marriage, but with all of the pressure on us and no support or guidance, or we just we couldn't sustain on our own. We didn't have the tools to sustain on our own. And so we ended up separating. And so I went into another chapter of difficulty yet again, just a different type of difficulty, because after an argument, we had a really huge argument. I left the home and ended up seeking refuge in a shelter. And so, of course, that's not ideal and it wasn't pretty. And it's funny to this day, if my mom or anybody was to listen in on this, they would be shocked, because a lot of these things I went through in secret. So when I left home and went to I was in a taxi cab crying, and the taxi driver asked, where do you want me to take you? And I said, honestly, I don't know. I just have to get away from this house and this man and just have peace. And he said, well, all I can think is to take you to one of the local shelters. And so I ended up there and with my babies. And so it was rough, of course. That's not the best ideal environment. So
this is in Kentucky?
Correct.
And yet, and your main family's not out there, right?
No, I didn't have any family there. My mom at the time, she had relocated to Atlanta. So I had my mom's family in Atlanta, my dad's family still in Chicago. And I was there in Kentucky, 19, 20 years old, alone and homeless with babies, a baby myself.
That's got to be would you say that's the hammock of our story with the lowest point? It's definitely got to be one of the lowest.
You know what? No.
Oh, here we go. Okay. All right. Let's go on that train ride.
That actually wasn't so bad compared to things that I started to go, because as I had more children, I eventually ended up getting remarried, relocated to Nashville, where my second husband was from. And we had, the additional children. And because of, I can't really even remember what prompted it. I believe there was a job loss on his part or something, but we ended up going through really rough times with the rest of the children financially, to where we were kind of bouncing from place to place, house to house. We even ended up moving in briefly with his parents, briefly with my mom. And so we just went through a really rough time financially. So honestly, that probably I would say was my lowest, having to go back home to my mom and to his parents, especially. Very humiliating. It was kind of like, can it get any worse than this? So I would say that would be the hammock, the having to go back home as an adult with multiple children and feel like a burden on your aging parents. So yeah, that was probably the worst for me.
Knowing your biography after, looking it over and everything, and is this the time that you probably dealt with the other stuff, the abuse?
Yeah.
Was that the guy?
Yeah, well, the abuse actually started with my first husband. Honestly, even as a teenager, just little puppy love relationships. Unfortunately, I wasn't a good chooser of men. So even as a teenager, little puppy love relationships always resulted into domestic violence. I mean, my very first crush boyfriend at 14 years old was abusive, verbally and physically. So it was something that I endured off and on in my life. So yeah, and then even like I say, even with my first husband, we had incidents where the police were called and there was physical stuff going on. But yeah, that was a constant theme off and on in my life throughout multiple relationships. So
I think it's important to bring it up because people wonder, what would draw you to like a shelter, and that's got to be one of the reasons,
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good to talk about that.
I actually lived in a shelter twice in my life, and both times that was kind of like the catalyst, is being embarrassed to admit to my family and friends that that's what was happening. So I tried to take care of it myself, and all I could think is either, let me just stay in a hotel or let me go to a shelter. but I don't want anybody to know that this, picture that most people thought we were the perfect family, of course, looking from the outside, so I had to keep up that facade. I didn't have to, but I wanted to keep up that facade out of pride and stuff. So, yeah, the two times that I lived in the shelter was prompted by domestic violence, in addition to not being able to sustain on my own with the children, to just turning in that direction to kind of keep it a secret what was going on.
When you hit that point, that second time around, and you're hitting that critical mass point where now you're a little older, a little smarter, would you say that's the crossroad to kind of go towards the direction? Because we know you hit the success. We're going to get into the success, but was that kind of like where you started to hit the unbearable point that you just started your other trajectory upward?